Okay, so what's an opinion that you have that might surprise people or seem unpopular?
I don't know if it is unpopular or surprise people. I think I'm pretty vocal about, especially to people that who know me. I'm pretty vocal about what I think. But I think the whole I think that as human beings, I think we need to stop reproducing and go extinct. I think I believe in that. I don't know if that'll surprise anybody, but that's what I believe in.
Well, the stop reproducing is one thing. Going extinct is that's pretty dark. Yeah, that's
I don't
interesting.
think we ever will. I don't think. I think human beings are just pests on Earth. We'll always manage to live somehow and just keep polluting it.
Yeah, there's something to that. I remember when I first watched The Matrix and that Agent Smith guy's comparing us to cancer, and
Mm,
that's
yeah,
stuck with me since 1999. in my
so
in my
true. And
darker mode, yeah, I think about that a lot. And when
yeah,
I'm
stands true today. Hmm.
My Viewfinder is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. CPA Alberta represents more than 29,000 CPAs, also known as Chartered Professional Accountants, across the province. CPAs are more than number crunchers who love Excel spreadsheets. They're business leaders, finance experts, trusted advisors, and entrepreneurs. They work in many different industries, from film to fashion, from government to oil and gas. Long story short, CPAs didn't just break the mold, they made their own. CPAs can help you spark your next big idea, pivot during difficult times, start your new business off on the right foot, and so much more. For an inside look at how Alberta CPAs are supporting their clients through the pandemic, follow CPA Alberta on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn. You can also visit cpaalberta.ca to find out more. Is humanity really a disease or an essential part of the experience of life on Earth? And can pictures somehow help communicate and effect positive change? Or are we just doomed? Let's find out if Twinkle's surprising thought actually reflects cynicism or perhaps an idealistic worldview, the view that we have the opportunity to do something about it, through photography or otherwise. I I I read somewhere, I can't remember what book it was, and now I'm pretending that I read books, but it was saying something about how currently, I can't remember the historical data of urbanization, but right now I think globally the average is something like 80% of the world's population now live in medium to high density urban areas. Um, and as you brought up, of course, climate change, culture, etc., they all have a major role to play. We brought up, I will see if I leave it in the cut, but the surprising and very cynical thought that you had about humans' place in the world. I actually have been recently directing that against photography, and how sort of the ability for photography to paint and then eventually to manipulate a sense of reality and give meaning to, let's say, commercialization, material wealth, even culture, to suggest that this IKEA ceramic bowl has greater value than a handmade ceramic from a small village in any country. These sort of powerful image-related things have somewhat poisoned the well. I think I read too that I can't remember which Polynesian country it was, but the American influence came very late, and so there were sociologists that had found this island, and the indigenous people had not yet been affected by the American ideal of beauty, and they still love larger women, and the idea of what a man should like. So that stuff hadn't existed. In the moment this market walks in with magazines, etc., they have attract incidents of social eating disorders and body dysmorphia and all this kind of stuff starts. The things that we accept are essentially sad, but kind of have become normalized in our culture. But you bring up, despite the cynicism, that I think you believe that photography has a role to play to perhaps combat that. Yeah.
I can speak to an example, a real life example that happened to me, and you know, I 100% agree. I mean, when you look at the advent of vloggers, on YouTube, there was recently a girl who was in Syria, showing everything was fine, and it was all la la land, and everything was back to normal, and people were like, no, it's not. There's still issue going on. People have real issues there, and I think like anything, photography can paint. Photography can do justice, or like you said, enhance. Situations like that. I care about. Um, I can speak from my own learning. I think in this one instance, when we look at Oaxaca, for example, I haven't been to Oaxaca. I was supposed to go, I couldn't because of COVID. But when you look at Oaxaca, it's in the top list of every blogger, every blogger. The Instagram, feeds filled with photos of Oaxaca. And when I did a lot of research into Oaxaca, if you left the town center and you went even, I don't know, 500 meters out of the town center and tried to dig in, you would actually find out that, the people who are rural farmers of Oaxaca are only now living on 50, cents to $1 a day. They are going through real rapid change in that society, because what has started to happen is that California has started to export vegetables to Oaxaca, and the local farmers are not able to compete to that. And so there's a huge issue with poverty there. These rural farmers now, because they're running out of livelihood, they are now trying to migrate illegally to California to work in those very farms that have actually taken their jobs. And when these farmers go to these Californian farms to work, they live horrible lives. Like, they can't afford to rent a place. They live in the open. There are women as well that go to work in these farms. And I'm telling you all this story is because not only I did research, but one of my friends' friend actually documented that life, so when women go into these farms, they have their face covered, not just for the pesticide, but also because they want to cover it so that, that the person who's running the farm will not come rape them. They don't want to, garner any attention towards their face. So they all live in the open. Women might or might not be getting raped in those fields. And there's this side of Oaxaca that, we have no clue of, because we are looking at beautiful Oaxaca pictures of, cactuses and, indigenous dance ceremonies and things like that, and Dia de los Muertos. But if I had not had that a friend of mine who had documented this life through photography, I would just have no clue. So, I think definitely photography, has, aggravated the situation in a lot of the cases. But I think, like any other medium, sometimes the kind of choice is also ours. In this instance, it painted both those pictures to me, and I found out about the truth and the reality because of the other photo as well, the other documentation of it as well. So, I mean, I agree with you. But I think, that, there can also be some good work that can be done. I mean, look at Louis Palu. I mean, the work he did on asbestos, and not every photography leads to changes like that, massive changes like that, but it brought in some change. So it brought in that particular change, which was great. So yeah.
The thing that stuck with me about Louis Palu, amongst all of his fascinating little stories, is that his mindset as essentially an archivist. I mean, the idea of these documentary projects, but there's a drive. I kind of hear it the way you're talking about the manner in which India is portrayed in media and sort of international understanding. There's that compulsion. There's something more that needs to be revealed. Is that what makes photography important? Do we need some sort of larger and impactful agenda? And then the second part is this commercialization question, which is, does it need a market for it to exist? If you go and document this, other than it being archival, will it have social impact if it's not commercially acknowledged? So the first question is, I mean, the first question is very selfish, because I don't actually have a compulsion to go and live in squalor to show people what's going on. And the second one is just cynical, because I'm not sure if people care.
Yeah. And, I mean, honestly, when I talk about documenting the photographs in India, uh, it started with my own vision of just wanting to go back in time, and it started with a very romanticized idea because if you look at my analog work, it's very romanticized past work. I love living in the past, so that's how it started. That I would go and kind of freeze the past in a frame, and that was just for me because it would bring me a lot of pleasure to see my childhood memories of circuses or street performers or carnivals, just those little things. So it started with a very personal, agenda because I wanted it for myself. Um, and I think it's good to keep it that way. But yes, as I've grown, through photography, now through Exposure Studio, I've started to apply to different, competitions and open calls and things like that. The only reason I do that is so that, there's maybe some not recognition, but I can at least get to know a few more people so that by the time I do that work, hopefully it reaches more people. Whether it reaches people or not, honestly, I mean, you know, the monetary side of it was never there because I have a full-time job. And from day one, I was watching this Bill Cunningham documentary, and he said, they can't tell you what to do if they don't pay you. And I've kept that as my motto in life, that they cannot tell me what to do if they don't pay me. So I'm going to do whatever the hell I want. But, this whole thing about documenting the stories of India, it doesn't have to be particularly sad or happy. I think it's more to do with nostalgia. There was this time that we all lived, and it's going away very quickly. And how do I document it before it vanishes? So whether it brings a difference in someone's life or not is different. I mean, as photographers, we can only hope that it does, or we can continue to apply for grants or continue to put our work out there. Whether museums or galleries pick up that work or not is a different story. With the advent of social media, now it's much easier to get your work out there. But who knows what is going to happen. And then going back to your question about, is photography kind of worth doing to tell these stories, or worth even, exploring? I think, when I started photography, I've kept it always very simple. My purpose in doing photography was to create work that hopefully someday would, make someone happy or serve a purpose. Serving a purpose is a very big deal. It's not easily achievable. If I do that, that will be a huge bonus for me. But overall, I think it was just creating work that at some point, even if I was dead and 10 years later, somebody found it in a pile of boxes or whatever, if they looked through it, it would make someone happy. I think that was the idea. So, we'll see where that goes. But, when I look at photography now today, I mean, on one side, you have people like Louis Palou, but on the other side, you also have people like Albaran Cabrera, the couple who creates these photos and, in gumchi paper, in Japanese, like rice paper, and they put like a gold foil underneath it, and they do this layered work, and it's fine art. But when I look at their work, it brings me peace and calm in my everyday life. It changes my life for those 5 minutes that I stare at their photograph. So, photography can be so many things. It can, as long as it's bringing joy to somebody or it's serving a purpose. To me, I am happy achieving either one of those, outcomes. And if I can do any of that, I think I'll be happy.
I was at I can't remember which talk, but I think it was George Weber said this, but it's been a theme too with Rani Matar said this, and Mark Seeley, and actually all of our speakers, Andrew Jackson and Louis Palou. But the sort of play on words for photographers. There was the George Weber one was, I think it was on street photography, and someone was asking about ethics and all this stuff, and he had a formal administrative answer about charter rights and public spaces, but he said at the end of the day, it's about you being able to answer the question of whether you're trying to show your subject in their best light, and I think there's this. It might be a bit naive. Or idealistic, but it's something that's been a hard question for me to answer. I think what that actually means, but I think I hear it in the way you speak, which is this. Despite you putting on the air of being a cynic and wanting humanity to end, I think the opposite's probably true. It sounds like you want to share a sense of peace in spite of whatever humanity as a whole seems to be doing. And again, we could talk all night about the media and how things are portrayed, and are things even actually worse, or do we just get too much information? When I think about Black Lives Matter and how many civil rights movements, women's rights, and that's not even going to global. I mean, you brought up how India's struggled to even establish itself. There's so much conflict. I mean, I think I read they're theoretically starting some battlefronts with China too. I don't know. It's the real world is so much more complex than I want to believe.
Yeah, it's no, you're right. I mean, and even with Black Lives Matter, although it's conversation probably for another day because it's a longer conversation, but yeah, I mean, when people talk about racism and, things now coming to the forefront, it's always been there. I can speak to so many topics. I mean, the foreign worker thing that, that the migrant farmers in Southwest Ontario. I mean, I was a temporary foreign worker in this country, and, the experiences I've gone through is not the best. I mean, I have very dark memories of being in Canada in the first few years. And even today, they haunt me. It's sometimes hard for me when people say, oh, you're in Canada, are you happy? And it's hard for me to answer that question because after 4 years of going through those personal experiences, I wasn't sure if it was worth it to be here, but again, longer conversation. But yeah, like you said, I mean, the issues have always been there. And I was just talking to my friend over the weekend, and, she brought up a good point. She said, if you look at writers from the 1970s, they had the same thing. They were so frustrated with life. And, that's how the whole movement in California started. There was John Lennon and all these people wanting, world peace and things like that. And, I said to her, yeah, I mean, I think every generation, when you look at a writer or, a philosopher or an artist, you will always find these voices of frustration, maybe now it gets amplified more and more because of media. But, I feel because of media also, it's become a lot easier to put more fuel to the fire as well, because again, another conversation. But, I think when I look at India, the political situation there's mass manipulation happening through just media alone. So I think it is the same issues that we've always had, but I think they get fanned a lot more now because it's easier to do so because of social media. But conversation, I'm sure, for another day because it's a lengthy thing to discuss.
Yeah, hopefully at the end of Exposure Studio, we can actually, I keep dreaming that, I mean, it won't be everybody. There are quite a diverse group of individuals in this package, but it'd be amazing if some kind of seedling, collective could start. And so we could have conversations like this, not necessarily for, in my case, a self-interest to publish something on a podcast, but even a roundtable discussion. And you brought up earlier, and I firmly believe this too, and this is a little bit of a narrow-sightedness, but I think there's great creative talent in Calgary. And what it's going to take for Calgary first and then whatever larger stage to see. Somebody gave me this sort of reflection that there are actually, I can't remember, a certain number of famous musicians and artists that have actually come from Calgary, but they don't publicly acknowledge it. Things like that are fascinating and kind of inspiring for me to kind of push against it. But I mean, that's why I'm speaking to you. I think if I can get as many people in this group in front of other people, I think it would be important for anyone listening to understand that there's beautiful photography out here.
I agree, and especially with exposure this year, Sati is the magazine that gets published.
Yes, Sanya's great, yeah.
I mean, oh my God, I picked up the magazine and I was like, oh my God, this is one of the best photography magazines I've seen in my life because, there's that analog nostalgia, obviously, but I mean, the work is just insane. The work they pick up that gets curated and gets put into. And I feel because of George Weber's, darkroom class at the UFC or SAIT, I forget, I think it's SAIT, there is amazing analog work happening in Calgary. I think better analog than even digital sometimes when you dig into it. Or maybe SAIT is doing a better job of curating it. But, oh my God, I was just so surprised to see that work. It was just amazing. I mean, every photograph in that book, and don't get me wrong, sometimes there are international calls as well. It's not majority Calgary, but the work in Calgary that is there for analog, yeah, it was very shocking and in a very, very good way.
I don't know. I'm just trying to think from our previous sort of setup conversation. Is there anything in your mind that we should kind of take a last look at? I have this thought all of a sudden, listening to you, that there could be other narratives that maybe we can explore by publishing articles or having these in text format instead of having to keep you on a phone call for more than an hour and a half.
No, and I mean, conversation is always great, and especially when you have somebody like you who comes from maybe similar background a little bit, and I have we share similar worldviews. I think it makes the conversation that much just informal, and it just flows naturally. So it might get harder to pin it down. Who knows? But no, it was great. There's just so many conversations. I think this will continue. I mean, if once the studio thing is over, we meet for coffee, I think this conversation will only continue. But, I mean, I have same things in mind that anybody else has, I mean, looking through my past history, identity crisis, what that means to be here. When I'm in Canada, go back to where you came from. When I'm in India, when I'm talking about Indian politics, my friends tell me, you're a traitor, you're a Canadian citizen, you're not even an Indian. Why do you have a say in Indian politics? It's how do you fit in anywhere and nowhere at the same time? There are so many of those conversations that, it is worth exploring, but it is constantly going on in your mind. Like, how do you address those issues in life? Looking at your history, like something that I haven't mentioned in this call is that my grandparents were from Bangladesh. Overnight when India got divided into Bangladesh and India, Bangladesh becoming East Pakistan and India becoming India. I mean, I can't imagine, we talk about, wrongful things. We talk about, if something doesn't go right anymore, we go on Twitter, we talk to the mayor or whatever. But I can't imagine, can you, like overnight where you're living is not your country anymore, and you have to pick up your bags and go. And so my grandparents were from Bangladesh, and, them moving to India, they lost everything, moved to India with nothing on them. And, that story, I was recently trying to, talk to my grandmother and ask her those stories, and she didn't want to talk about it. It was a very painful process. And that was a huge realization for me this week. We talk a lot about, searching for one's identity and looking at our past history. And, I mean, after that conversation, and I was very sad and angry after that conversation, because my mother told me other things that, my grandmother, they were all put in a camp when they moved to India. They had nowhere to go, the poverty and all that. And that just made me angry and sad. And I was like, I know the history a little bit. I know it through other people's lens. Yes, my granddad and my grandmother, they all had to go through these issues. But I was like, is that anger and despair going to help me bring, is it helping me right now? It's not. It's just making me more angry than I am. It's, frustrating to hear all that. So what can I do currently that can help people? If I talk about that West Bengal, Bangladesh region, there are still people who need help. Maybe I can create a purpose now to help them. There's no point for me at this, at this moment in time to look at the past and get angry and feel miserable because it's not being productive for me at this moment. I would love to know the history, but if it is, not productive for me, I don't want to pursue that at this point. And I would rather, if I go back, I would rather do more community work to make positive difference in those communities and for people that are actually living now, rather than, my grandparents who, my grandfather or, his parents were long gone. So, it's a harsh realization. We all want to explore the history and where we come from, and it's good to know history, but I think that really put things into perspective for me that, it is a very painful process. I'm not going to explore that. Maybe in the future I will, but right now I don't want to explore that part. I'd rather use that time and that anger to make a difference in the lives of people today, rather than trying to dig something that I really can't help. I can't go back to the past and, change what my grandparents have gone through, or what my family even still to this date is kind of getting used to. I can't change some of that. But what I can change is, make a very positive contribution to maybe some of the communities that are present in those areas right now. So, I would focus on that. So I think that was a good epiphany, good realization that I had recently. Moving to Canada made me realize that, immigration is not easy. I mean, I legally migrated. Can you imagine becoming refugees to your own country overnight? You're just told this part of Canada is now, it belongs to Russia, and you have to move to Canada, and you have nothing, you can't take anything with you. You just have to move to, Ontario. I can't fathom that idea. I don't know how they, even made peace with that. But, history is good to know, to question and to learn from, and to not make the mistakes again. But sometimes I think when you start digging in too much into your own personal history, you have to see how, I don't know. For me, at least, it was a good realization that it wasn't bringing me peace and happiness. It was bringing me a lot of anger and sadness, and it wasn't productive. I kind of moved away from that this weekend. I decided to not explore that anymore. But yeah, I mean, there's so many conversations and themes and things that we all have gone through and that, we can talk about. But yeah, I'm sure this conversation will continue.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, it's inspiring. I have very similar experience actually, starting to research my past. So everything you're saying, I'm kind of, it's like I'm sitting in an exposure studio talk. You're speaking about your experience, and I'm realizing how similar. I mean, it's never going to be the same because we haven't lived the same life, but how similar these structures are. My grandparents' Korean War. That was a impoverished third world country until probably the 80s, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I think the two things, I guess, for me is I'm learning through my life, and again, this is, I don't know how many times I've become much more spiritual, so I'm no longer agnostic. But I guess that God gives me this message, to put that strongly, which is that we're not alone in our experiences. And I think photography is a weird thing where it can be both social, but it becomes very isolating because you tend to be looking through your own viewfinder, essentially. But when I meet other photographers, yeah, it's amazing how much there's a shared experience that maybe drives us to love this craft so much. And the other thought I had, I can't remember if it was a Zen Buddhist book, or I think it was about self reflection, but it sounds very similar. That there's this whole of looking at the past and digging at all of these negative aspects of our lives is endless and leads to destruction unless you do it with grace and some joy, ironically. And I don't know, I guess maybe my thought is the only time I actually feel that way is when I speak to like-minded people. So in this case, yourself or some of the friends I've made in Calgary, it feels a little bit lighter to hear the common struggles. So I'll disagree with you. I don't think we should eradicate humanity. I would be too lonely, I think.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I think maybe we just, try to be more pleasant to each other. Now I'm just being childish, but yeah, more hugs, less yelling.
Yeah, and when I say eradicate, what I mean is, when we fellow said, like, we are, when we talk about climate change, we're not talking about nature, because nature is here to stay and not the environment. It's just, yeah, it's like when the meteor hit and the dinosaurs went extinct overnight. I think that was a very quick process, but I think with humanity, it's just, I mean, again, I don't want to end it with this darkness, but it's just, yeah, it's a very slow process, right? And a lot of people are paying the most price that have reaped the least amount of benefit from this, And I think it's good that there are people like, us. Maybe we're not making a change, but at least being aware of those issues is the first step that we take towards, bringing in any change. I think at least we are being aware. There's definitely a lot of movement now happening, which is making more and more people aware as well. So that's a great thing. I think that's the positive side to all of it. But yeah, I mean, it would be nice if humanity was here to stay, and our culture and our memory stayed throughout. But it's just, yeah, when you see it, it just looks like a very slow, painful process of death. But yeah, but you know what? We are past. We are here to live. I mean, you will kill all of everybody, and then there'll be two people who will, I'm sure, procreate and fill the world again. So yeah, I don't think we are going away that easily. But no, I think talking to you has been a real pleasure, because like you said, I think photography can be a very lonely thing. When you look through your viewfinder, you're out there taking photos, you're just contemplating, you're meditating, you're focusing. But sometimes, yeah, like through your own experiences, I think you see certain things a lot more than others. And I think talking to you gives me kind of, affirmation that there are more people like yourself in Calgary that are going through similar questions that I've been questioning myself with. And so it'll be great when we finally can eventually get together and talk about those things. But I would love to know about your background and your experience. I mean, it sounds very fascinating.
Oh, well, we'll meet up and we'll figure out how to save the world. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
simple, one picture at a time. Thank you for spending so much energy with me. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you agreed to do this. It's nice to essentially digitally meet you. Yeah, outside of Instagram.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. Very, very kind of you to have me. Like I said, I'm very new to the craft, but yeah, I mean, this was an amazing conversation and gives me a lot of hope about people, like-minded people in Calgary, and just that. Yeah, like you said, you have also gone through similar experience. I would like to talk more about that in the future. But yeah, like digging through your past history and sometimes is it worth it or not, or questioning those things as well. I think that'll be a good conversation in the future. So no, thank you.
And so that was my sit down with Twinkle. It's amazing how much depth is attained the more we experience and see the world. Twinkle is a woman who has placed herself in many experiences, and it shows. It shows in our conversation and, more importantly, in her photographic work. I'm glad to have met her, and I look forward to watching her rouse the world into positive spiritual action, one photo at a time. Most beautiful sight you've ever seen?
Oh, there are so many. I think in general, it's just, when you're sitting somewhere by yourself and there's this sort of meditative, sense, sitting, among nature. I think that's just, in general, just beautiful. I mean, you just have to be in the right frame of mind to take it. But I think if you're alone, somewhere and you just look at something and you're able to connect to it at a more universal level, I think that's important. It could be a park, it could be in my bed on Monday morning when I just don't want to wake up and I'm hearing all the birds chirping in the park. I think, it's just taking that moment, I think. That can be anywhere, but it depends on how open you are to it too.
Today, I want to tell you about ATB's new podcast, The Future Of. Join Todd Hirsch, ATB's Vice President and Chief Economist, as he connects with special guests who offer unique and useful perspectives about the future. Explore how our economy and communities not only brace for change, but embrace the opportunity it creates. From the future of women in business to the changing nature of work itself, The Future Of helps understand what's coming and what we need to do today to get to the tomorrow we want. Featuring 2 episodes each month, plus bonus episodes, The Future Of includes interviews with top community and business leaders from Alberta and around the world. Subscribe to The Future Of in the Apple Store, Google Play, Spotify, and everywhere podcasts are found. And connect to ask your questions about the future by emailing thefutureof@atb.com. I hope you've already subscribed. If you can, rate the podcast. Send me some comments about how things are going, what your thoughts are on particular touch points with my guests. Volunteer yourself to get on my show, or just tell all your photographic and non-photographic people to get on this bus. I hope that through these conversations we can keep learning more about the philosophic approaches to photography